Ancient Greece was the birthplace of philosophy and democracy, but alongside great ideas, there were also some rather unusual customs. Many of these traditions might seem strange or even shocking to modern people. What aspects of ancient Greek life truly set them apart from other civilizations? One of the darkest aspects of ancient Greek society, pervasive across city-states, was slavery. Enslaved people performed a variety of tasks, from household chores to manual labor in quarries and mines. Athens relied heavily on enslaved labor in its silver mines at Laurion, where conditions were notoriously brutal. Workers toiled underground, sometimes chained, with little chance of escape. Sparta likewise had its helots, an entire subjugated population living in servitude, forced to work the land and provide food for Spartan citizens. What made this deeply unsettling was the constant fear of slave uprisings. In Sparta, for instance, the elite lived in perpetual anxiety that the helots, who vastly outnumbered the free Spartans, might revolt. As a form of social control, Spartan youth participated in the Crypteia, during which they were sanctioned to intimidate, spy on, and even kill helots deemed threatening. This institutionalized violence underscores just how integral and yet precarious slavery was to the Greek economic and social system. Sparta's demographic demands for strong warriors extended into unusual marital practices. Some historical sources note that Spartan men, especially older ones without strong heirs, might arrange for younger, more virile men to impregnate their wives. The objective was to produce healthy children for the state. This approach to procreation was less about romance or personal attachment and more about fulfilling a civic duty. Such arrangements could be orchestrated with a semblance of mutual consent among Spartans, guided by the idea that the city's needs superseded individual preferences. Though not exactly wife-swapping in the modern sense, it was a stark example of how far Sparta would go to maintain a robust citizen population. The custom blurred lines of marital fidelity in service to communal prosperity. Outsiders, including other Greeks, often viewed Spartan sexual norms as bizarre or morally lax. Some city-states were scandalized by the apparent casualness around paternity, while Spartans defended it as rational. To them, loyalty to Sparta overrode personal jealousy. In Thebes, there existed an unusual military unit known as the Sacred Band, consisting of a few hundred elite soldiers. What made this unit unique was that it was primarily composed of pairs of lovers. The belief was that men bound by mutual devotion would fight with extraordinary courage, never abandoning each other in battle. Ancient sources, including Plutarch, describe how this strategy proved highly effective in warfare. Greek culture had a more open attitude toward interpersonal relationships between men, viewing them not only as part of the educational process, but also as a source of deep mutual respect and loyalty. The Sacred Band became renowned for several victories, most notably at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE, where the Thebans decisively defeated the Spartans. Eventually, the unit met its end at the Battle of Chaeronea, where they were slain, but their legacy as fearless warriors remained firmly embedded in Greek history. From a modern perspective, such an approach to military organization might seem unusual, but for the ancient Thebans, it was entirely justified and even seen as a strategic advantage in warfare. In much of ancient Greece, particularly in Sparta, but also in other city-states, the practice of exposing unwanted infants was a stark reality. If a newborn was deemed physically weak, deformed, or simply unwanted, sometimes because the family could not afford another child, the baby might be left outside city boundaries, often in designated places on hillsides or near trash heaps. The social rationale behind this was complex. A child who appeared too frail might never become a strong soldier or a productive citizen. In a society where war and competition were constant, many Greeks believed resources should be devoted to those with the best survival prospects. Sparta became especially notorious for this practice due to its rigorous system of training future warriors. Spartan elders inspected newborns, and any sign of significant defect could result in exposure, effectively a death sentence. However, in other regions, some of these infants might be rescued by strangers, sometimes even to be raised as slaves or servants. While certainly cruel from a modern perspective, the Greeks considered it a form of population control and an extension of their city-state's welfare, ensuring that only the healthiest individuals grew to adulthood. Hospitality, Xenia, was considered a sacred law in ancient Greece, overseen by Zeus himself. According to custom, any traveler who arrived at one's doorstep had the right to a warm welcome, food, and shelter. The host, in turn, was expected to treat the guest as a messenger of the gods, for no one could be certain whether Zeus himself had taken human form to test mortals. A lack of hospitality or mistreatment of travelers was seen as a grave offense and could bring divine wrath. There were stories in Greek mythology where those who failed to honor Xenia suffered severe consequences. At the end of a visit, it was common for the guest and host to exchange keepsakes, guest gifts, to ensure that their families would remember and honor the bond established between them. Violating the rules of Xenia could lead to long-standing feuds or even blood revenge, as it was considered an insult to Zeus Xenios, the protector of guests and strangers. Thus, the tradition of hospitality was not only a moral obligation, but also a sacred duty, playing a crucial role in maintaining social relationships in ancient Greek society. In ancient Greece, there was a socially recognized practice of relationships between adult men, called Aristae, and adolescent boys, Eromenoi, known as Pederasty. In some city-states, such relationships were regulated, encouraging mentorship rather than mere physical attraction, where the older partner was expected to pass down knowledge, military skills, or moral values. However, in practice, these relationships were often ambiguous. From a power dynamics perspective, there was a clear imbalance between an adult male citizen and a teenage boy. Modern historians point out that the line between education and possible coercion was often blurred. Even in antiquity, attitudes toward pederasty varied. For instance, in Sparta, these relationships had a primarily educational and military purpose, while in Athens, they could include both mentorship and sexual relations. Philosophers also debated this practice. Plato, for example, sometimes praised the spiritual bond between a mentor and his student, but in other writings he condemned physical relationships as base and improper. Despite these debates, the sexual aspect of pederasty was widely acknowledged in Greek society and often seen as a formative part of elite education. Athenian democracy, heralded as a pioneering form of government, had its quirks, and one of the strangest was ostracism. Once a year, Athenians assembled in the agora and decided whether to hold an ostracism. If they chose to proceed, citizens would scratch or write a name on a piece of pottery. Whoever's name appeared, the most often would be exiled from Athens for 10 years without trial, defense, or any formal charges. The rationale was to protect the city from potential tyrants or overly ambitious politicians. In theory, it gave the people a mechanism to remove someone who might endanger the democracy without resorting to more violent measures. Interestingly, ostracism did not strip the exiled individual of citizenship or property rights. They were simply forced to leave Athens for a decade. If they returned early, the penalty could be death. But after 10 years, they were free to come back without stigma. Though it might sound harsh, many Greek citizens saw ostracism as a way to prevent social and political tension from boiling over into civil conflict. Sometimes prominent statesmen, like Themistocles, hero of the Persian Wars, found themselves unexpectedly ostracized due to shifting political winds. It is well known how harsh and disciplined the people of ancient Sparta were. Masculinity was so highly valued that, before marriage, a bride's head was shaved and she was dressed in men's clothing. Scholars have long debated the reasons behind this unusual wedding custom. Eventually, a general consensus was reached that there was no mystical or ritualistic meaning behind the practice. The bride was dressed as a man to make it easier for her warrior husband, who was unaccustomed to female company, to approach his new wife. Later, as the relationship developed, the wife would gradually return to her feminine appearance. Adultery laws in many Greek city-states were strict, though they primarily protected the husband's honor rather than the wife's autonomy. In Athens, if a husband discovered his wife in an adulterous affair, he could legally kill the male adulterer if caught in the act. Such a law, known from the orator Lysias and others, effectively sanctioned vigilante justice under specific circumstances. Women accused of adultery faced severe consequences too: social disgrace, divorce without financial recourse, or even forced prostitution if the husband so chose. In a culture where women were expected to remain largely secluded, the breach of marital fidelity was treated as a grave offense against the husband's household. For a society that sometimes indulged in extramarital relationships for men, the double standard was glaring. Men's sexual transgressions were tolerated, while women's infidelities risked lethal or lifelong punishment. Today, we are accustomed to education taking place in universities or specialized academies. However, in ancient Greece, particularly in Athens, philosophy often thrived in open-air settings. For instance, Plato held his lessons at the Academy, located in a gymnasium outside the city walls, while Aristotle taught at the Lyceum, where walking and conversing in the grove became an integral part of the learning process. The Greeks saw learning and discussing complex ideas amidst nature or during leisurely walks as both natural and beneficial. This practice strengthened one's connection to the surrounding world, blending intellectual exercise with light physical activity. Moreover, the city itself fostered a dynamic environment for philosophical discourse. Any passing citizen could overhear a debate and join in, making education an interactive and communal experience. Philosophers like Socrates took this even further, preferring to engage in discussions in city squares, workshops, and even in the streets. This approach reflected how deeply Greek culture valued reasoned debate and the pursuit of truth, turning philosophy into a vital part of everyday life. Greek city-states did not shy away from capital punishment when they deemed it necessary. The methods of execution varied depending on the severity of the crime and local traditions. One of the most common methods was stoning, where the condemned was pelted with stones until death, often used for serious offenses such as sacrilege or treason. Another form of execution involved throwing the convicted person off a cliff or into a pit, a practice that almost always resulted in immediate death. This method was notably used in Sparta for eliminating unwanted infants and executing criminals. Poisoning was also employed, with the most famous case being the death of the philosopher Socrates, who was forced to drink hemlock after being accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. Although crucifixion is more commonly associated with Rome, in some Greek city-states it was used as a punishment for slaves or particularly heinous criminals, sometimes involving binding the condemned to a post rather than a full crucifixion. Impalement, though primarily known as a Persian practice, is also mentioned in Greek sources as an extreme form of punishment in rare cases. One of the most ominous aspects of punishment was the denial of burial for executed criminals. The Greeks believed that without a proper burial, the soul of the deceased would not find peace in the afterlife. Therefore, leaving a body exposed to public view or forbidding its burial was considered the ultimate disgrace. In some instances, corpses were displayed in public squares or along roads as a deterrent to others, reinforcing the idea that punishment extended beyond death itself. While Greek festivals, particularly athletic ones, are often portrayed as celebrations of the human body in a purely aesthetic sense, there were also events with overt sexual underpinnings. The Festival of the Adonia, dedicated to Aphrodite and Adonis, included women publicly mourning the death of Adonis, followed by symbolic acts representing rebirth and sexual longing. In other festivals, processions featured phallophoroi, men carrying large phallic symbols through the city, evoking fertility and male potency. These displays could be ribald, accompanied by bawdy jokes and songs that pushed the boundaries of public decency. Though comedic and tied to religious function, they also reflected an open acknowledgement of sexuality in the communal sphere, something that might be deemed weird or risque by later Western standards, which have often placed sexuality in more private realms. Even the famous Dionysian festivals, which gave rise to Greek theater, could involve raucous revelry and phallic processions. One of the most mysterious places in ancient Greece was Delphi, home to the famous Temple of Apollo. The priests and Pythia who served in this sanctuary provided prophecies on a wide range of matters, from the outcomes of wars to personal disputes. The Pythia would sit on a tripod above a fissure in the earth, from which vapors were said to rise, and she would enter a trance-like state that the Greeks believed to be a form of divine ecstasy. Her incoherent speech was considered the prophetic words of the god, and special priests would interpret and translate her messages for the supplicants. Sometimes the prophecies were ambiguous, allowing for multiple interpretations. It was believed that Apollo's wisdom had a deceptive quality, forcing the person who asked the question to make their own choices. Because of the oracle's significance, Delphi constantly attracted pilgrims, rulers, and envoys. The prophecies could influence political decisions for entire city-states, adding to the sanctuary's authority and cementing its reputation as a mystical center of the ancient world. In ancient Greece, great importance was placed on proper burial rituals and respect for ancestors. It was believed that the soul of the deceased had to travel to the realm of Hades, and to ensure this journey, a series of rites had to be performed. The body was washed, dressed in clean garments, and adorned with laurel branches or wreaths. A common practice involved placing a coin in the mouth of the deceased for Charon, the ferryman who transported souls across the river Styx. According to belief, without this coin, the soul could not reach Hades and was doomed to wander restlessly among the living. The body was either cremated or buried in designated sites, ranging from simple graves to grand burial mounds or mausoleums. In some regions, the practice of secondary burial was common, where the bones of the deceased were reburied after a certain period, symbolizing additional care for the soul. Lavish funerals and elaborate tombs were reserved for individuals of high status, serving not only as expressions of mourning, but also as displays of the deceased's social position. The Greeks believed that honoring the dead ensured their peace in the afterlife and secured the favor of the gods. The comedic plays performed in the Athenian theater often surprise modern readers with their frankness and sharp wit. Aristophanes, one of the most famous ancient Greek playwrights, was unafraid to mock powerful politicians, wealthy elites, and even the gods. For example, in his comedy Clouds, he satirizes the philosopher Socrates, portraying him in a highly exaggerated and caricatured manner. In Frogs, he brings Aeschylus and Euripides onto the stage in the underworld, where they compete for the title of the greatest tragic poet. Aristophanes' humor was filled with allegories, innuendos, and often crude satire, but the Athenian audience embraced it enthusiastically. Theater was not just a form of entertainment, it also served as a platform for public discourse. His comedies frequently included obscene jokes, sexual innuendos, and coarse language, which might seem surprising given modern perceptions of ancient culture. However, this genre provided citizens with a means to ridicule their rulers and peers without fear of harsh political persecution, making comedy a vital part of Athenian democracy and free expression. Hospitals, as we understand them today, did not exist in the ancient world, and people often turned to the gods in search of healing. The cult of Asclepius, the god of medicine, was particularly popular. In sanctuaries dedicated to him, a special ritual known as incubation was practiced. The sick would spend the night in designated sleeping chambers, hoping that the god would either reveal a cure in their dreams or miraculously heal them directly. The temple priests often interpreted these dreams and provided guidance on how to recover from illness. Some of their recommendations were quite rational. Patients were advised on dietary changes, herbal treatments, or physical exercises. However, there were also more unusual methods such as contact with sacred snakes, which freely roamed the temple grounds and were believed to possess healing powers. Many ancient texts describe miraculous recoveries, attributed to the divine intervention of Asclepius. While some of these accounts are undoubtedly exaggerated, the cult of healing played a significant role in the development of Greek medicine and helped lay the groundwork for a more scientific approach to treating diseases. Despite wars and conflicts, the Greeks established a remarkable tradition. During the Olympic Games, a universal sacred truce, Hetaerae, was declared. City-states that were often at war with each other would cease hostilities, allowing athletes and spectators to travel safely to Olympia and return home without obstruction. Violating the truce was considered sacrilegious, as the games were dedicated to Zeus. Historical records show that even the most powerful city-states strictly adhered to these rules, though there were occasional exceptions. For most Greeks, however, respecting the sacred nature of the games was of great importance. This tradition seems almost unbelievable against the backdrop of constant conflicts between the city-states. Yet, the power of religious devotion and the shared recognition of the value of competition allowed the Greeks to unite, if only briefly, under the banner of fair play and reverence for the gods, demonstrating a common spirit despite their political and territorial rivalries. Women in ancient Greece typically led a secluded life, especially in Athens, where wives were expected to remain in the gynaeceum, the women's quarters of the house. However, Hetaerae occupied a completely different social niche. They were highly educated, freely participated in male gatherings and symposia, and were renowned not only for their beauty, but also for their wit. Some Hetaerae, such as Aspasia, the companion of Pericles, played a significant role in public and even political life, influencing powerful men and philosophers. On one hand, Hetaerae were often given a scandalous reputation because they did not conform to strict family norms. On the other hand, their status was distinct from ordinary prostitution. Hetaerae could own property, enjoy a degree of autonomy, and even engage in intellectual debates with prominent thinkers. For the Greeks, this was a unique social institution in which beauty, intelligence, and female independence were valued and respected. Such an unusual role for women astonished foreigners and even some Greeks themselves, as Greek society remained patriarchal, granting little freedom to ordinary wives and daughters. On the island of Crete, as in Sparta, there existed unique customs that might have seemed strange to the rest of the Greek world. One such tradition was the marriage abduction of young men. Unlike the common concept of bride kidnapping, this ritual involved an older man abducting a younger male with whom he shared a mentorship and romantic bond. This act of abduction was conducted with the approval of the young man's family and had a symbolic nature. The two would retreat to the countryside for a period, during which the older man would teach the younger one hunting, military skills, and other essential aspects of adulthood. Upon returning, the abducted youth was presented with gifts, symbolizing respect and recognition of his new status within the adult male community. This practice upheld tradition and strengthened social bonds. To modern observers, such rituals may seem astonishing or even shocking. However, in Crete, these ceremonies were not so much about romance or coercion, but rather about hierarchy and education. Some historians view this as a remnant of ancient customs, where ritualized abductions marked a young man's readiness for independent life and the defense of his homeland. Such astonishing and sometimes shocking customs existed in ancient Greece. Despite their peculiarities, this civilization laid the foundations of philosophy, theater, science, and politics, proving that there is much to learn from them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss new content. Also, be sure to check out our other videos, where we explore the most mysterious and dark chapters of history.